ವೆಲ್ಕಮ್ ಸ್ಪೀಚ್ ಆಗತ್ತೆ. ಆ
ಹಾ,
ನಂತರದಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ಮಾತಾಡಿ.
okay.
ಓಕೆ.
You be in English only all the time.
ಓಕೆ ಸರ್. ಆಫ್ಟರ್ ವೆಲ್ಕಮ್
Okay. So very good morning, everyone. Myself Ullas. So I'm the managing partner of Dixochi, and we are taking up the technical support here. So as you all know, today we all are here to uh, attend one of the very interesting faculty development program, which will actually give us a complete platform wherein we will be knowing what is the state of English and what all the things that we are supposed to take care with respect to keeping English as a language and giving the importance for that in the higher education in the higher education sector. So today I'll be just taking over the session for you all, and we have got very renowned personalities here who will be just addressing you all and will be giving you a very nice complete section of the need and the complete factor where how we actually drive English with respect to higher education. So myself Ullas, so I heartily welcome everyone here. So officially, I request Dr. C.S. Hunegowda sir, Head of the Department English and also the Organizing Secretary of this one-day FDP webinar to address the gathering. So please address the gathering, sir.
Thank you, Ulas. Good morning to all. Myself, Dr. Hunegowda CS, Head Department of English, JSS College of Arts and Commerce, Gundlupet. At the outset, through offering my humble pranams to the Guru Parampara of Sri Kshetra Sutturmach, I offer my humble pranams on the lotus feet of His Holiness Jagadguru Dr. Sri Shivaratri Rajendra Mahaswamiji, the founder of the esteemed educational institution JSS Mahavidyapitha. And I offer my heartfelt humble pranams on the lotus feet of the great visionary and our guiding spirit, His Holiness Jagadguru Sri Shivaratri Deshikendra Mahaswamiji, the present pontiff of Sri Kshetra Sutturmat. I can take pride to extend my sincere welcome to our beloved sir, Dr. C.G. Betsurmat, the Executive Secretary, Professor Murabada Mallikarjuna, the Director, Shri B. Niranjanamurthy, Assistant Director, College Education Division, JSS Mahavidyapitha, who have been lending their motivational and intellectual support to meet the vision and mission concept of our esteemed institution through organizing these kinds of proactive activities. Welcome you all. It gives me an immense pleasure to extend my warm welcome to my beloved teacher, my beloved guide, and my beloved mentor too, Sri Professor V.R. Badigir, Professor of English, whose service to the teaching and students community both at college and university level is noteworthy. Sir started his teaching career from Sandur Education Society from Bellary district and reached the step of achievement and academic excellence as Professor of English at Gulbarga University. He has guided over 30 MPhil and 19 PhD scholars. I would fail if I do not convey my best regards to Sir because I got my MA and PhD degree under his guidance. Sir also has rendered his service as professor and chairman of the Department of Studies and Research in English for a decade and has worked as the chief editor of a journal entitled Journal of Literatures in English for over a decade. He has written several language literature related articles and has published more than 10 books. Today, Sir is being with us as the guest of honor. Welcome you, Sir. Now, it is my privilege to extend my heart contented welcome to my dear Dr. B.N. Srikirti, Associate Professor, Department of Studies and Research in English, Gnanabharati, Bangalore University, who is the resource person of today's National FDP webinar on reviving English at higher education. Indeed, Dr. B.N. Srikirti is an MA and PhD in English from the University of Mysore. Since 1998, he has rendered his service as a diligent teacher in English at Hemagangotri PG Center at Hassan. At present, he has been rendering his valuable service as Associate Professor of English at Bangalore University. He has been awarded he has been awarded for writing poetry in competition in Kannada and English languages and translated English poems into Kannada language. As a teacher in English language and literature, he has published an article in Aniketana, journal published by Kannada Sahitya Academy, Bangalore. Has also presented papers in national and international seminars, conferences, workshops, and symposiums, and he has presented papers whose papers are published in peer-reviewed journals. As a token of achievement, he has published over 2 books. So, Dr. B.N. Srikirti himself has proved that hard work is the only a way for success. I am glad to receive the resource person to deliver the proposed speech on this occasion. Welcome you, sir. Now, it is my pleasure to extend my hearty welcome to my young friend and colleague, Mr. Ullas, the managing director, Diksochi Mysore, for his voluntary involvement in organizing today's National FDP webinar. Welcome you, my dear young man. Thus, I extend my cordial welcome to our beloved principal, Dr. N. Mahadev Swami, who has been lending me a full support to attain our vision concept in organize this kind of webinar, seminars, and conferences even in future days. And Sri Shambhulinga, our office superintendent, who is always ready to extend his full support to organize this kind of seminar. At the same time, I extend my lovely welcome to Mr. M.J. Prakash, my young friend, Mr. Mariswamy, IQAC coordinator, teaching and non-teaching staff of our college, and all my dear participant teachers of different faculties for being with us to make the webinar a grand success. Thank you all for accepting our kind invitation. Thank you, Ullas. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. So, on behalf of everyone, I extend my hearty welcome to the head of the Department of English and the organizing secretary, without whom this workshop would not have happened. Sir, I heartily welcome Dr. C.S. Honegowda, sir, to this webinar FTP. Welcome you, sir. So next we have our principal from JSS College, Gundlupet, who will be giving us an introductory speech. So please.
Plus, I'll speak in the last actually.
Okay.
Oh, but yes, sir.
Now I request our guest of honor, Professor V.R. Badiger, sir, about whom we heard for a very long introductory speech now. So he has been one of the very big pillars in upholding a lot of youngsters to the height of sky where people can do better with the English language. So I request Professor V.R. Badiger, sir, to give the guest of honor speech. Please, sir.
Good morning to all. Thank you. I must thank the president of the JSS Society, the principal, Professor Mahadevaya, and my student and the organizer, and other participants and the co-workers in this webinar. The subject of the webinar came to me a surprise to some extent. I knew that it is on English language, but there are certain things we must reveal now at this occasion that when you read the history of England, we come to know that English was not the language of England in the 4th century. As British people ruled us and imposed English on us, the Romans ruled the Britain people, imposed the Latin language on them. So Latin was the language of the country for nearly 200 to 300 years. And the development of English took place later when the Anglo-Saxons migrated from the upper portion of Germany to Ireland, and they mixed with other people. Those are called brutes. The word Britain, British, they all come from the word brute. Brute were the native people of the Britain. So English language was developed as a kind of a mixed language. We can say it is a Creole because 2-3 tribes were there in England. And it developed gradually and came to be recognized as the language of a nation only in the 15th century. Of course, we come to know that it was Old English, and after that it became Middle English when we read about Chaucer's Canterbury Tales for nearly 200 years. But English as a modern language, which is easily understood by us now, began in 15th century, and we regard Sir Philip Sidney as the first poet, critic, and patriot. I call him a patriot in the sense that he overthrew the Latin language, the yoke of Latin language, and gave importance to English as the subject of the curriculum in the schools. There were schools in the beginning. There are no colleges and universities. And he came with this plea for fighting, in a sense, fighting for the English as the language of the nation and English as the medium of education in England. Even after 16th century, most of the texts prescribed in England were Latin. We come to know that a great poet like Milton wrote his poems in Latin, some of them, and Sir Philip Sidney wrote his sonnets. And after, in between, we find William Shakespeare, the great dramatist and a poet. So Elizabethan period is the period of the modern English. So it is the same period when the British people came to India in 1600 with a charter from the Queen Elizabeth to start trade and commerce. And they brought English with them. And everyone knows the process of colonization, how they fought with the Dutch and French and expanded their empire, established imperial rule on us for nearly 100 years, we should say, roughly 100 years. Some people say 150 years. So the English was made as a forced language. As I say, Latin was imposed on the English people. English was introduced by Lord Macaulay in 1835, Munich, and he started the medium of education, English as the medium of education in primary and secondary levels. So English education started in India, and so to say, the children of the upper castes and classes slowly began to be educated in English, and it was necessary for running the administration for Macaulay. He says he quotes somewhere, he says that he wants a hold of brown Englishmen to run the administration, because there were no sufficient people to English people to run the administration in India, as it was a very vast country. So they inducted the English knowing people in administration. That was necessary, though in the initial stage at the lower levels. They didn't give the higher levels. And only in the later period, after 3-4 decades, they began to admit the highly educated Indians in ICS administration, army, and judiciary, all those things. But in the initial stage, Indians were not given the higher positions. So English became the language of our nation. Though we all still argue that Hindi is our national language, English remained as one of our national languages. Even the British left our country in 1947 midnight after the freedom. So English remained as a legacy, one of the legacies. They have left so many legacies in our country. So English is one of the legacy, and it remained. And we all felt it is necessary language, because ours is a multilingual and multicultural and multi-religious nation. You must say it is like a boiling pot of all cultures. We must say like that. More or less, it is like America, because people from various parts of the neighboring areas, they migrated long ago. I don't agree with some theories regarding the arrival of the Aryans and the return of the Aryans, the mixing with the Dravidians. And about these Aryans and Dravidians, there are several other tribes who entered from various, even from the northeast side and southeast side also. Many people entered our country, and the country became a kind of a hybrid nation, having all kinds of people in our language. And before the English, we know that Sanskrit was the language of a nation. Sanskrit was the first language. Sanskrit was the mother languages of all the Indo-Iranian languages. And later Sanskrit became the language of our nation and the court language. And our Dravidian languages are born of the later Sanskrit, that is Tamil, and Tamil is the origin of other South Indian languages like Kannada, Malayalam, and all those things. We had languages. So now English has occupied the position of what Sanskrit occupied in ancient days. So now English is thought to be by the middle class and upper middle class as the language of prestigious class. So it has become unavoidable to learn English and live with English and use English as a part of our curriculum at the lower and the higher level. And in the English as a higher level has become inevitable for us, higher education, because all the subjects that we study borrowed from the West, they are in English, not in mother tongue. That was the reason English has become indispensable in the higher education system. So there is a necessity to review. I must tell some words about this significance of the review. It gives the implication that we must rethink to what extent we should use English, or what are we have been doing with English was right, and all that. Perhaps most of our senior professors, early generation, knew that they were studying English as a literature. They studied. Before that, in 1960s, they studied only Shakespeare as the subject of MA course, the MA honors, and later the changes came. Now we have saved a lot in the curriculum of the Department of English, reducing the quantum of the study of English literature itself. English literature, in addition to English literature, we study English language, linguistics, phonetics, semantics, all those things we are studying. It has become very vast and complex, and we are studying other literatures in English also. So nowadays English literature is not there. I say sometimes to my students that there is no English literature. There are English literatures of different countries. So we now identify the literature of England as the British literature, distinctly different from English literature of other countries, especially the Commonwealth countries. So this is the vast area now. So English to be reviewed, teaching of English, learning of English is to be reviewed at the higher level. In the sense, we must give more importance to the learning of language and communication skills. That's what recently it is encouraged by the UGC, that study of literature should be lessened, and study of English language and communication skills is more important for in the academic course as well as for other professional courses like BE, MCA, MBA, and other BE, BTech, all engineering professional courses. So English is to be taught from linguistic point of view. That is the main importance, and there will be a change in the nature of study, and English language is reviewed once again at the higher level. I hope I have said sufficient on this occasion. Once again, I thank you all, and I allow the next resource person to come and speak his speech. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. So, thank you so much for giving us a very nice brief of complete English and the history of it, and the importance, where we got the importance for the English, how the language has grown from a different level to a different level, and all those things. It was very informative, and thank you so much for that, sir. And now I request our today's resource person, Dr. Sri Kirti, sir, who is the Associate Professor of University of Bangalore, to take over the session. So please, sir.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I think it is very clear in audio, listening, and the audio condition is very clear, I think. Is it audible, my thing, my speech?
Audible, sir. Go on, sir.
Okay. At first, I have to thank everyone who has organized this webinar, and particularly I thank and seek the blessings of the head of the institutions and the chair of the JSS MUT, and Professor N. Mahadev Swami, the principal of the college. And I also thank for considering me to come and speak in this webinar on my familiar and my interested subject given by Professor Ponnegoda, who is the professor of English in the institution. And I also thank for those considering me to invite and make me to deliver a speech regarding this particular subject. And indeed, it is immense pleasure also to speak to the participants. And when Professor Vanegoda contacted me in this regard, and he has given me an option to myself to decide the subject to be taken by myself. And as the teacher been teaching from many years at the university level, as I have observed so many things to be reconsidered and reviewed in the context of the particular subject we are dealing, English, I thought as teachers are participating in this webinar, I wanted to share some of my observations and some of my interpretations about this subject to make them prepare, or to make them understand, or even to provide them their real identity as an English teacher in the context of past, present, and future. Because the very identity of this particular uh, nomenclature, English teacher or English professor, of course, in India, is not a very stable as well as well defined, as far as I have observed and understood. It's not very stable and it is not well defined also, because primarily when considered the English teacher, English is understood primarily as a language in the general sense. It has its own kind of definitions in various form, because English is not just a word to be connected only with language, but it has lots of connotations. English is the name given to the people of England. English is the language spoken by the people of England. English is a subject studied at the universities. So with these kind of things, with the historical identities and the historical practices, the word English is an adjective basically, but our understanding of English as a noun is very less. And therefore, in considering to identify ourselves as English teachers, the English is there an adjective, but an adjective which is considered as qualifier of the noun is always a difficult to consider that adjective with the teacher because of lots of historical reasons, as well as the practical conditions to say how and what makes a teacher an English teacher. So it's a very complex thing, because the kind of identity that we have received as English teacher is a historically informed identity, a historically informed professional to meet the current demands of English. Because there is a very big difference between what is English at present and what was English in the past. And as at the beginning of this webinar, Professor Bariger, who has given a brief introduction with the historical understanding, with the historical interpretation of what English is and how English evolved, that is the primary identity and the historical identity that the English professionals have carried on, are still carrying on. And that historical identity is found with the current need of English as a language is somewhere mismatching. It's somewhere very difficult to accept directly in the context of the historical identity established and the present need of English teaching. Because the present need of English as a language is very different from how English was started in India. Because uh, English is being historically understood in the academic context as literature, language, a degree at the universities,
Prakash,
and in
just a
country like India, it has provided lots of historical identity as well as superficial identity also to certain extent. And to know how it is historically informed, of course, a brief history of the development of English in India is to be considered. Uh, Thomas Babington Macaulay, who enforced the British government to establish the English system of education, insisted that the English should be taught to Indians primarily to prepare Indians as clerks. That was the very limited and the primary objective of introducing English language in India, to prepare Indians as mere clerks. And indeed, at the time when uh, Macaulay started the English system of education and introduced English language through English literature. English literature and language was establishing its imperialistic identity around all over the Europe, indeed all over the world also. With these kind of developments of the colonial establishments of England, English became slowly a commodity rather than mere a language or literature. And one more important thing to be observed to be understood in the context of learning, acquiring English language is that the method of introducing English language to Indians was followed through the model of teaching literature. And teaching literature in England was considered by the well-known headmaster of rugby school in England, who is the father of Matthew Arnold, Thomas Arnold, who established this practice with an understanding that with the decline of the religious control over the society, or the English society of 19th century and 18th and 19th century, it was considered that teaching English literature to the students of the schools would make them to have certain virtues, make them to maintain certain required virtues at that point. And that particular idea of Thomas Arnold made an establishment to understand, made a practice to impose English literature to English people themselves primarily. And that same model of teaching literature was considered in India to introduce English language. And there was another condition also prevailed at that time, was that there was no model to teach English language, and there was no idea of teaching any language at any point in any of the countries. And as English was establishing colonies and taking control over the colonies, and they wanted to introduce English language, then the need of teaching another language became an essential thing politically, because there is very comfortable in understanding and acquiring a language culturally, but English was required to be acquired as a political movement, as a political act. And that is where we find the model that Macaulay introduced was by introducing literature to inform English language. And indeed, in England, about the state of England, Arnold once writes, which I quote, "Undoubtedly, we are drawing on towards great changes. And for every nation, the thing most needful is to discern clearly its own condition, in order to know in what particular way it may but meet them. It may best meet them. Openness and flexibility of mind are at such a time the first of virtues. Openness and flexibility of mind are at such a time the first of virtues." And very specifically, I want to mention these two particular things at this point, is that openness and flexibility of mind are at such a time the first of virtue. Why I'm insisting these particular words, openness and flexibility of mind, is that in the context of English teacher and the history of teaching English, both literature and language, since it started in India, there is some kind of rigid mentality and rigid practices continued in understanding literature and language. And we haven't come across at any certain point to make this kind of condition what Arnold has said, openness and flexibility of mind. And it is this particular reason which is making us to have the identity, the English teacher, as a difficult one to the present need of teaching English language. Because there is a practical condition to be understood in the context in the context of the higher educations in India, that whatever is required to be taught and learned as English is not being considered, upgraded, made flexible at the university higher education. Because that's what I said, whatever we have acquired the teaching of English in higher education at present is only a historically informed practice, a historically informed practice, because the acquisition is from the imitation rather than theoretically and practically. What the colonial system of education introduced, the practices of teaching, is still being continued with only a minor modifications. And that's why it is so ridiculous, or it could be very difficult to assess at this point, that why we are still considering to study British literature in order to acquire English language, as well as in order to teach English language at higher education. There is a complete mismatch of the practices as well as the demand of English in India. And this is the particular reason why I always come out with an expression that the identity English teacher is a paradoxical in the context of India. The identity of an English teacher is paradoxical, because with the cultural influences and the influences of the curriculum studied, yes, we are English graduates or English masters. But when it comes to the practical execution of the knowledge that we have acquired to the contemporary learners, where English language is the need, is the demand, there is a very big gap, because we are given the information of literature, we are given the knowledge of literature, but we are expected to perform as the language teachers, as the teachers of English language. This is where I mentioned the acquisition is from the imitation rather than theoretically and practically. And one more thing to be observed, with this kind of not opening ourselves and inflexible from the long time, English masters are system declared. We have a political and the education system, and teaching English has been declared by this system of politics and the education, rather than with the theory and the practices that we have acquired academically. What we are learning at the masters are directly connected with learning literature produced in English language. And in the process of learning literature and studying literature, we are coming across the influences of English culture. And therefore, there is only the practices of English culture and uh, induced style of English language, or the knowledge of English language, rather than either theoretically, practically, or pedagogically acquired English language. That is where the serious problem which is coming across many of the English teachers at various parts of this country to meet the demands of the students in teaching English language. It is to be considered in another context. English is born as a praxis. as a praxis, which is meant, which means translating an idea into action rather than as a body of language. It is an idea, translating an idea into action. And this particular condition, the practice of imitating English, is the existing and the practicing condition in teaching English language. I think my observation is agreeable by many of the teachers who are gathered here, because when it comes to the practical execution of the class, the practical performances of teaching English language to the class, what we are considering, what we are following is only the imitation of our teachers, is only the imitation of our either the beloved teachers or the teacher who has taught well in our classes of the graduates and the postgraduate classes, which are making us to have the practice and the style of teaching English rather than with any pedagogical practices or the pedagogical principles. And that is where we find the difficulty of managing the classroom. Not that I'm saying that we are all unable to manage the classroom. Yes, of course, we can manage because we are narrating something, and that narrating is controlling the classes. But at the last, what is found with the completion of a semester, with the completion of the curriculum or the syllabus given to a particular period, what is found with the student is the student, of course, getting passed through or clearing the examination is another factor. But when it comes to the real need of using English language, a student who has cleared either in learning English as a language or studying English as literature at the graduate and the postgraduate level is found with some big amount of inefficiencies, big amount of ignorance over the use of English language, either in the form of writing or in the form of speaking. To bring into this particular thing, I want to give one practical condition that is prevailed in metropolitan cities. Very specifically in Bangalore, I want to give an example. A private institute which advertises that it teaches English language is having almost more than a crore of turnover, more than 1 crore rupees of turnover in Bangalore itself to teach English language, in teaching English language. And we can understand what is the demand of English language and how English is being required, English is being projected at the practical conditions of life, and why such establishment is making such a big turnover of money is to be connected with what is being failed by the curriculum of English at the higher education. There is a serious problem of managing or even making ourselves open and flexible to the requirement of the need of English language at present time. And this is the condition to say that English teacher, the identity English teacher, is a paradoxical status. We are historically being recognized because of the historical reason we are recognized as English teacher, but we cannot claim completely at the practical level that we are English teachers because we are not giving the proper requirement or furnishing the complete requirement for the need of the hour. English is now being a commodity. It is the commodification of the language which is giving us a big challenge, because teaching English through literature, which is to be considered in the context of Arnold, which I said at the beginning, was from the point of view of developing the virtue, the celebration of virtue. But the need of the language, English language at present, cannot be just confined to the requirement or the celebration of virtue. Because English is required to be informed in the context of a commodity, in the context of ability of an individual to participate himself and to establish himself a comfortable life. As at the beginning, Professor Badiger mentioned that the need of English language at present is at the various stages of life, at various levels of life. And one has to acquire a substantial knowledge of English language in order to acquire the substantial knowledge of anything. Indeed, it is inevitable to acquire English language to a particular extent with particular capacity. But what is being done, what is being considered by the teachers at the higher education is the real question. I always observe in so many contexts, and very specifically in coming across with these kind of context about speaking English studies or English language and speaking to English teachers. English teachers are now an endangered species. There is no a condition to carry on ourselves the historical identity being provided or given to us with the colonial influences, colonial magnanimity of English teacher. Because English, as I said, a commodity now is being given by various people in various forms. Series of digital representations, digital productions have been encouraging to acquire English language from the primary level itself. We have lots of applications on the mobile phone, videos on the YouTube, websites on the internet, which provide lots of knowledge about English language. When considered all this, it is obvious to understand that English is a commodity. But what the teachers at the higher education, and specifically English teachers at higher education, are considering to teach English language? What is the model? What is the theory? And what is the pedagogical practice that the English teachers have employed to teach English language? When this particular condition is being examined or kept together to examine what is being provided at the present time to acquire English language on the internet through the digital applications and the videos of the YouTube, and what teachers of English been performing at the colleges, at the teaching at the institutions to English language, we find a complete paradoxical situation. And this makes us to think and made me to think and express that English teachers is an endangered species, because we haven't considered this openness and flexibility in order to meet the need of the hour. And this particular status is to be revised and examined. And to bring in this kind of rigidity or some kind of inflexible nature that the English teachers have developed, I have to bring in some more historical conditions to make it clear. Well, that learning English language was considered through literature, which the Macaulay's theory of introducing English literature would make the Indian middle class society would acquire certain knowledge of English culture so that there would be a certain level of acquisition of English language, which would make the English government to run smoothly. And it was for him a successful project, a successful project. But soon after the decolonization, with the inevitable status and the conditions to continue the education system, we carried on the English system of education to meet the economic and the social requirements of the time. And English was simply taught and understood and imposed that teaching and learning literature would bring the knowledge of language. And that was, of course, for a certain extent, in an induced form of acquiring English language. It happened. It was successful. But during the 80s and the 90s, the global development of economic practices demanded the requirement of English language more than ever. And it is at that particular point, at the higher education, the need for English graduates increased. And that particular situation was given much importance to acquire the degree given by the system and to develop oneself uh, as identify oneself as an English teacher on the basis of the certificates or the degrees provided by the system. And to acquire at that point certain kind of knowledge of language and then to acquire the degree on that particular subject, very specifically English subject, there was a complete dependency on the available notes, the ready notes. Indeed, one interesting thing that I have to share with you at this point is the introduction of English literature, studying English literature in India was actually the influence of print capitalism which developed during 19th century England. With the establishment, the establishment of English language, English political system all over the globe, and accordingly the need of language of English in the many parts of the country, it provided them the superior identity. Assisted with the inventions, the printing technologies, development of printing activities, encouraged the English people to produce works of literature in English language. With the industrializing society, the need of the leisurely hour to be fulfilled was with works of literature. And that made the people of England to consider studying, reading literature. And for that leisurely hour, print capitalism captured the people. And that provided a greater opportunity for the print capitalism of England to move into India and establish it. That's why if any of the old libraries of the old universities is been visited, we find numerous number of English books, very specifically books related to English literature. It would be very surprising and very happy also to find, and a lover of literature would be very glad and seriously expresses his gratitude how these all books have been procured into the library. But to be understood from the another point of view, why all such books have been introduced or been sold to Indian university libraries? Who were the readers at that point? Who were all referring? And that was the enormous amount of books. And that is to be understood how the print capitalism of England has taken control over the Indian universities, libraries of Indian universities. And that one particular thing of print capitalism was later considered in India during the 80s and the 90s to produce the ready notes of studying, understanding English literature in order to easily procure the degrees, the bachelor's degrees or master's degrees. And it is that particular point which made the students of that period, many of my contemporaries who I used to make fun of my classmates and my batchmates saying that, we are all Rama brothers. Rama Brothers, in a sense, that was the main publisher of the study guides related to English literature. Whatever is not being said by the teacher, whatever is not available in the library, everything was given in that short, ready notes of literary works, which was published by Rama Brothers. So many of the English teachers of India, as well as of the Indian universities, are all, Rama Brothers, or indeed the products of Rama Brothers. And this is how print capitalism once again established its dominancy over the Indian education system, in which that particular system made any of the student of the master's degree consider studying English in a comfortable manner. But indeed, it assisted. There's no doubt it provided a good amount of knowledge about literature. But in the process of acquiring the degree by studying those notes of that particular period, it did not provide the idea of teaching language. No theory and no pedagogy, no pedagogical practices or the pedagogical principles were introduced to teach English language. With these historical backgrounds, the academic historical background or the historical academic background of acquiring English language and to teach English language, we are facing at present the difficulty, a paradoxical status in teaching English language. And that is where we find the status of English teacher as paradoxical. We are all English teachers because of the historical identity, because of the historical practices. But when it comes to the practice of a student, when it comes to the identity of a student, we find that there is a difficulty in the student in using the language to a required level. Well, when the student is facing the problem, it's obviously connected with the performance of the teacher, with the commitment of the teacher. And that is where we find the difficulty of managing the teaching English language, managing the teaching English language. And with these historical difficulties and the practices, there emerged in during 1990s, the decades of 1990s, the idea of ELT, English language teaching. Indeed, before that, many forms of, teaching English language were all, established, but that was not a condition at that point. Like English as second language, English as foreign language, and so many forms evolved, but consolidatedly together, it emerged as one particular thing called English language teaching, ELT. And that particular thing, English ELT, English language teaching, created a new practices which is completely different from what Indian universities are performing. It came out with lots of books, lots of pedagogical understandings, and related to the linguistics and linguistics, with the idea of linguistics, that new pedagogy established a new condition in acquiring English language, in teaching English language, which has not been found in our practices. Means I am talking in our sense, means in the at the higher education of Indian universities, our practices of English, teaching English language, is not meeting the present requirement of teaching English language. The reason is because, once again, it is connected with the historical practices. Indeed, now professors of that particular period have a lots of reverence to learning literature, studying literature, and acquiring language. Indeed, with what Professor Badiger mentioned at the beginning, is agreeable, is acceptable. But at the same time, with the present status of the people, with the present status of the students who are in need of English language, are very difficult in acquiring language primarily, proficiently, to meet the need of the hour. And that is where we find that the differences between what English teachers are performing at present time in the higher education, and what the students are required for their practical fulfillment at the of course at the world of job, or when they enter to the job market. Indeed, it seems very ridiculous also for me that some students who have applied for the English teachers coming out with uh, wrongly used language, or with a series of grammatical mistakes in their writing. It would make anyone surprised at that point in questioning the student has studied English and as well as cleared English language, given with a certificate at the university, but at the same time unable to use the language in a correct manner, in a proper manner. And this particular problem is to be understood, analyzed, examined, and clarified by the English teachers themselves. And that's why I said at a point that English teacher is an endangered species, because an English teacher, if considered with this kind of historical practice, historically informed or historically continuing the identity, the present need of the English teacher won't be coming across. Because the way that the language is to be taught for the present need of the students is not being seriously considered by the universities at the higher education level, when English could be taught in a very simple way, in a very direct way, by certain videos, certain methods, and new pedagogical practices through applications, then it really obviously raises the question why a teacher at the university to teach English is required. Because when English is been commodity, an international commodity, it's not known to many of us that this international commodity, which has been established as a very big industry of producing English teaching methodology, is gradually taking over the control of teaching English language. Teaching English language through online, through various methods it has developed, and the basis of ELT. It's not known. Still, England is having a very big control over English language teaching across many countries. It has, now it was in 1994, a statistical data provided. It has 3 billion of turnover only related with English language teaching. Still, England has this kind of control over teaching English language in many countries of the world. 3 billion pound, 3 billion pound is being the transaction been now considered, procured through the process of ELT only. The dictionaries, the English, universities providing to us language, grammar, language teaching with series of publications are all been coming out because they know that English is a commodity and exactly it is being considered. It is in this context also, like at the present time, that the government of India has taken decision to boycott certain Chinese applications or Chinese goods and commodities for certain political and economic reasons. It's not known that English is being one of the commodities which is actually taking lots of money from us. We haven't understood because it's all been the understandings to be considered, to be examined by the English teachers. If we are not considering these conditions and the developments happening in related to English language, as I said earlier, English teacher is an endangered species. And this particular thing, again, to be considered, to examine what can be done to come out of this particular condition, what can be considered to come out of these difficulties at this point. The one particular thing is, as I provided certain information of the historical conditions of teaching English language and acquiring English language, as we are very much into the cultural systems of English by studying English literature, English teachers have certain kind of pseudo identity or even a negative identity about themselves. Either as an English teacher, teaching English language, having some cultural practices, and at the same time, deep inside the heart, deep inside the mind, with the fear of inefficiency and inabilities of teaching English language, we have again the pseudo identity. And this particular thing of having our identity in a very strong manner is to be corrected, is to be reconsidered by certain practices of linguistics and pedagogy in teaching English language. This is the point where reviewing English at higher education is to be considered. This is what I meant in saying reviewing English at higher education. What is to be reviewed? It is the teachers of English language is to be reassessed, self-criticized, self-examined, and self-corrected to find the new, better, or the best methods of teaching English language to the students. And teaching English language cannot be universal, cannot be common. It changes from place to place. It changes from student to student and even from one academic year to another academic year. So there is a necessity of going through the primary knowledge about sociolinguistics. linguistics as well as sociolinguistics in order to understand, assess the students of particular place, particular background, in order to understand their linguistic abilities in the context of the mother tongue, and then to consider framing the curriculum and method following the teaching methodology for those children or those students. And this is to be done at the micro level, at every classroom, in every classroom, at every place. As a teachers, we have to consider these practices and these conditions in order to bring in a new change. And whatever we have, the identity as identity with the historical information, with the historical force, has to be removed. That's why there is one practical condition or a practical situation I wanted to share is, we are very good at teaching a poem, reading a poem, talking about Shakespeare and describing the characters of Shakespeare's. But when it comes to the condition of teaching grammar, teaching language, understanding the methodology to teach language, there is a maximum failure among the teachers. It's all because, not that they are, I'm saying that they are not efficient, but there is not sufficient preparation in the context of the pedagogy by acquiring linguistics and the socio-linguistics knowledge to teach English language. Of course, a practical condition or a question could be raised by the teachers, how to consider, because technically we have to follow the given set of syllabus or the curriculum to a particular class or a particular semester. That is the first priority to be considered, to be executed. Yes, that is one of the reasons for not allowing the English teachers to develop their competency in teaching English language. What is being considered in framing the curriculum or the syllabus for teaching English language at the universities is again a historical practice, is again the historical condition. And this historical practice and this historical condition is still prevailing the teachers of English language. Though we, the English teachers, are eligible, are capable of accommodating, adopting any of the new understandings about the methodology of teaching, is not being liberated by the syllabus or the curriculum provided by the universities. There is a very big difference between what is being introduced in the syllabus and what is required for the student. We are all good teachers. We are historically identified, therefore we are good teachers. And as English is one kind of threatening tool also, we maintain the classroom. But many of us do not know what is the identity we have after the class and what is the result of engaging the classes. That's why I said that the student of English could not write completely a simple letter without errors, without problem. And that raises a serious question: what English teachers are teaching? Obviously, if the government or certain system coming across this particular question, there's no doubt that all teachers would be replaced by computers. And naturally, we are all coming out with, computer labs to be established, in colleges, very specifically at the degree colleges, which is another kind of computer mafias entering, the software mafias entering. But when it comes to know that English can be taught to the students into their ears directly, into their minds directly, I think that is the point where English teachers are no more required. It is in this context I keep on insisting in many of my lectures related to English learning and English at higher education that English teachers are an endangered species. And with these kind of conditions that we are facing at this particular point, there is an urgent, necessary, inevitable condition to prepare ourselves coming out of the historical influence and the historical conditions to teach English language for the required level. And that is to be considered, as I said, with our self-indulgence in acquiring the linguistics, in studying the linguistics, understanding sociolinguistics, as well as certain pedagogy associated with ELT, English language teaching, and incorporating in our classrooms to practice. And at the same time, we English teachers could demand the universities to in order to provide the required curriculum to teach language properly. Because what is being considered still at present is, as I said, the Arnoldian model of teaching literate language. As much as the virtue is required to be taught for the students, language is also required to be taught. This is where the problem we have as English teachers. The problem is, as I said earlier, we are given with literature, but asked to teach language. We tell the story and we expect the student to express the language, to show the proficiency in the language, or to show the knowledge of grammar in the classroom. And that's why to be considered practically with any of the textbooks, English textbook at the degree level, language English textbook, we can find how illogically and unscientifically a chapter is being introduced. For example, a poem is being introduced of a certain interest of a certain member of the committee, and at the end, certain grammar related ideas or the grammar related information are provided. And at the examination, the student is expected to answer both the things, the thematical understanding or the summary of the poem and the grammatical part of that chapter. Where is the logical connection between the poem and the grammar elements introduced? It's a very big challenge to a teacher to move or jump from a poem to the grammar level, to teach the grammar. And this is the point which I always insist, that the identity of an English teacher is paradoxical in India. Is paradoxical. The very identity and the performance are not matching together. That is where the problem of English teachers and the need of reviewing English at higher education. And for certain kind of things, I want to bring in some of the ideas which I have thought and which I have understood with certain readings. To be considered in the context of the word, English is an Eliot's phrase, is a heap of broken images. This is the problem. English is a heap of broken images accumulated since colonialism, capitalism, post-colonialism, neo-colonialism, globalization, Anglo-globalization, multiculturalism, and to the world made by capitalist globalization. In all this context, English is in demand. English is being required. In all these conditions, how do an English teacher, how does an English teacher maintain his identity is a very big question. The way we procure the knowledge of English language is through the study of English literature. Is through the study of English literature. And what is being asked to perform, as you know, it is the language. What is the demand of the students? Finally, the idea of language, the abilities of using language comfortably. And it is in this context, with this heap of broken images, English, we have to manage the classroom. That is where we find a complete mismatch, a complete paradoxical status for English teacher. And to review, there are lots of things to be considered. It will be revised at the universities in order to prepare English teacher for an effective and an influential academician at the higher education. Because English is not just a condition of language. English now is a discourse. Could be a very broad term I am introducing at this point. English is now a discourse. In what sense I consider is whatever we are required to understand with the present advancement and the development of knowledge, we have to depend on English language. And as English language provides all these requirements, all these fulfillments, English is not just a language, it is a discourse. And this particular status, by claiming English teachers, we English teachers, obviously to follow the discursive method in teaching English language. That is, we have to incorporate the primary knowledge in order to enhance our identity as English teachers at higher education. And with this kind of conditions, I just try to bring in some of the methods that one could incorporate. We teach grammar, of course. Grammar is essential part or the major part of English classes. Indeed, there are 10 types of grammar, like comparative grammar, generative grammar, mental grammar, pedagogical grammar, performance grammar, reference grammar, theoretical grammar, traditional grammar, transformational grammar, and now universal grammar. And with all these types of grammars, what grammar we consider to use in classroom is a big question. What method we consider, what type we consider to use in the classroom, which raises a serious question. How are we able to execute the idea of language to the students with these types of grammars? How do we do? How can we make ourselves? And there is also one particular condition in connection with English language teaching, that is grammaticality. It is, in linguistics, the term refers to the conformity of a sentence to the rules defined by a specific grammar of a language. This is one particular thing to be understood clearly and committed ourselves in teaching language. Grammaticality. As I said, there are not many things. And of course, there are so many types of languages, so many types of English is also required at certain point, like technical English, uh, a colloquial English, communicative English. But what are all we providing? The English language is the academic English. So we are good at teaching, literature and using language in the context of the literary terminologies. But at the same time, we find very difficult in making the students to understand the language in the form, what I said, the grammaticality, introducing the language in the form of grammaticality, just making the specific, the conformity of a sentence to the rules defined by the grammar of a language. But at the same time, one particular thing to be adopted in teaching grammar is the pedagogical grammar. That is nothing but the teaching grammar. Teaching grammar. It is the grammatical analysis and instruction designed for second language students. Grammatical analysis and instruction designed for second language students. That is to be considered majorly or primarily to teach language and grammar at higher education. Remember that higher education in the context of India doesn't mean that the students have come with the primary knowledge of language. Not obviously, everyone has come with the knowledge of English at a required level or with the substantial level. There are some who are coming with the first time listening to English, English words, so many English words also. But for all these kind of conditions and the problems of the practical classroom, uh, we need to consider this pedagogical grammar, which is drawn from linguistics, psychology, and second language acquisition theories. And when all these considered by English teachers, remember what I am insisting by mentioning all these names or the terminologies is for the teachers to prepare themselves by going through. It is indeed our own responsibility and a greater responsibility, not just only to make the classroom effective and influence the students, but also for our survival mechanism. As I said, endangered species and the lots of applications and the methodologies being introduced in the form of machine or introducing the machine learning English language through machine. We have to prepare ourselves with all these practices, with all these knowledges of teaching. And that is the requirement of review of English at higher education. And one more thing, very specifically to be considered at this point is majority of the Indian students are linguistically oppressed. Linguistically oppressed. It is not just uh, the oppression that we have historically, culturally, and socially in India, but the new form and the new category has already been emerged in India, that is on the basis of the linguistic oppression. And this linguistic oppression is nothing but the oppression done by English language. English language has oppressed. And this category, whoever is being oppressed by English language, is the linguistically oppressed category. And for this linguistically oppressed category, English teachers at the higher education are required to prepare themselves to meet the needs of the linguistically oppressed category by adopting the pedagogy of the oppressed. the pedagogy of the oppressed. It has not been seriously observed, or certain English teachers might have observed seriously uh, among the students' behavior and the attitudes, who has certain capacities of understanding and the commitment to study, but with the lack of the English language knowledge, there is certain kind of divided personality we find among certain students who are very interested, very committed, and very good in understanding the other subjects available in his or her regional language. But because of the English language deficiency, there is a kind of schizophrenic attitude developed by the students who could be categorized as linguistically schizophrenic. On the basis of the language, the student is being psychologically deprived and divided. There's a divided personality in the student because of the language, because of the language. And because of the language also, there is a cultural schizophrenia also in our student community. It could be it must have been experienced by ourselves, many of the English teachers ourselves, at their during their master's level or at the bachelor's levels, with the insufficient knowledge about English language, how either ourselves or other friends are separated from the major category who are comfortable in using English language at that time. As students, as students itself, we have understood how we are divided, how our attitude was divided, or indeed to be said in generally, how the class is divided just on the basis of the language. One who speaks English comfortably, there is one group in that classroom. One who is unable to use language comfortably, there is another group. One who is very inferior, that no language is acquired sustain for a comfortable level, that particular group or individual is completely separated. And this is how the linguistic ability has been creating the psychological conditions of dividing oneself, of getting oneself into a schizophrenic condition, which I mentioned, the linguistically schizophrenic and culturally schizophrenic. Because language also formulates a set of cultural practices. Language is also a form of culture, and that is where we find how the teaching English language at the higher education is been influencing on the personalities of the students. How a student is linguistically and culturally been developing a schizophrenia at this stage. These are all the serious conditions that English teachers have to be considered and to be reviewed in the way that we are performing at the classroom, in the classrooms. And that is where I said that English teacher has the capacity of introducing so many things. It's not just a teacher, because English, as I said, is a discourse. There is a condition and the capacity of an English teacher to understand so many things in a broader way, in a discursive manner. And to teach English language, we have to develop these ideas, these practices. And when considered with this oppressed section or the category of the students, the pedagogy of the oppressed, as I said, is to be employed, is to be understood very deeply. And that should be our discussion and our engagement in order to come out with the effective classroom performance. The pedagogy of the oppressed should make critically understand the tensions, contradictions, fears, doubts, and hopes in acquiring second language. Is the primary idea that what should be done in our classrooms for those oppressed, linguistically oppressed category, that is The pedagogy of the oppressed is to be understood. As I said, our students are linguistically oppressed. It's a severe problem. It's a severe problem. To mention that, I just came across one incident few days back that a student who was studying MA in English in one of the colleges in Bangalore left the course and joined as a security guard in a multinational company. The student of English literature joining as a security guard in a multinational company means what is being taught, what identity that we have provided, we have given to a student of English literature. He just left the course, and on what basis that he was selected? That is also very interesting and shocking. He was selected on the basis of the knowledge of English he had for that profession, for that job. When such a kind of condition is prevailing in the context of English, we can understand, because that is where it's a very good example of linguistically schizophrenic, linguistically oppressed. He got the seat to study English, but he did not have that ability and the confidence to continue in that subject and acquire accordingly a profession on the basis of the subject. So he is linguistically oppressed. And for that knowledge, for his knowledge of language, he was given a responsible identity. Of course, an identity where he could earn also as a security guard. A very practical condition, a very practical. When I heard this, I was really shocked and came across with lots of understanding that what is happening, what are we doing at this point as English teachers? What is happening at higher education, the condition of English? It is with this kind of understanding, with this kind of notes, that a pedagogy of the oppressed is to be understood and employed by the teachers of English at higher education with the knowledge of linguistics, sociolinguistics, pedagogies, and the knowledge of ELT. We have to upgrade ourselves, review ourselves, coming out of that old historical identity, and to reconsider, to frame ourselves into the fit ourselves into the new identity as English teachers, so that a greater contribution for the academic activities and for the academic progression to the not just to the institution but to the whole country in a bigger sense, I'm saying that we could provide. And this is the consideration, the point of considering, to review ourselves English as English teachers at higher education. And my very idea of stating reviewing English at higher education, the English is with the multiple understandings. English is not just the language, it is also English teacher, English culture, English grammar, and everything considered coming under the English. I wanted to bring in an understanding or a thought to review ourselves, and hope with my kind of presentation and the sharing of my understandings and the ideas, that there would be certain developments or the progression or a few thoughts evolving among ourselves to review ourselves as English teachers. By saying these things, I thank once again for the organizers, for the institution, and to the seer also for his blessings to continue with our academic pursuits. And thank you. And uh, uh, once again, I thank for all the individuals and Professor Honegoda for giving me opportunity to speak and express some of my understandings with you. Hope I'm convincing you with my understandings. Thank you again. Thank you, one and all. Over to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So we have some questions from the participants, sir. So I'll just go on with some questions for you. So yeah, kindly answer them. The first question that we have is from Manjuna ji. So he's asked, like, can you highlight about need of language lab to teach English? This is required as per AICTE for polytechnic colleges.
See, the need of language lab is an idea established by certain multinational companies, and very specifically with American companies. The language lab was the idea evolved with the practice of medical transcription, where with the lack of American human resources in recording the medical cases in the written form, the doctors were providing all the information in the oral form, which was recorded and then transformed as a file to another country, specifically India, to make it into a written form, where at that point the person who used to convert it into the written form was in the need of the familiarity with the American English pronunciation. And in order to make familiar the American, there the idea of language lab established to induce into the ears and the brain directly the American pronunciation, so that the worker could accept, could develop the familiarity with the American pronunciation and turn the audio file into the written file, into the written form. And that was the requirement. But what is most important, that is not the requirement of everyone. So what I insist is there is no necessity of language lab. Why language lab is being in the practice into the limelight is because of the software companies and the hardware companies of computers. As there is some nexus between the government establishments and these companies, they're all trying to dump the software and the hardwares into these establishments, institutions, education institutions. See, our only purpose of teaching language is not to make them familiar either with the English conversation or with the familiarity with the English language. Our responsibility is not just to introduce English language only, but our responsibility of introducing English language to an individual is, as I used to mention once again, Thomas Arnold at this point, that we have to make a student who has acquired English language to be independent, to be critically thinking, to be identified as a well-educated who could contribute to the nation, who could contribute to the society, not just for his individual survival. We should not be making a student who has acquired English language as a labor for any multinational company. I have a broader view. Of course, for a simple existence, one would be very comfortable by going through the language lab, listening for hours together, how English words are pronounced and how it could be maintained. So language lab is not an obvious thing. English teacher is the obvious thing. So whoever has raised this question, indeed a good question, but at the same time, one should not be depending on these instruments, either the hardwares and the softwares, to escape our responsibilities. It is not known to many of the English teachers that these hardware and software companies are snatching our responsibility, our jobs, by introducing such things. And English teachers also, with certain kind of passivity, are developing an affiliation with these materialistic dependency to teach English language. No, English language is to be taught in order to think, understand independently. Think and understand independently. We have to prepare a student of English to life itself, not to work for somebody else. So it is in this context, I don't insist very specifically that a language lab is required. Language lab is to prepare a laborer. No, English is to be taught to prepare an individual for a society, an individual for a nation in a greater context. Now, probably I may be too exaggerating at this point, but yet it is the need of the hour. We have to prepare an individual as an independent thinker. At least it is not that one would be independent and one would live like king. Of course, one has to work under some system or somebody. But with the independent thinking, it gives him the freedom. The ultimate purpose of the education is fulfilled there. So language lab is a substitution that an English teacher expects. Then what is your role? If somebody is working not on the regular basis, somebody would take care, and a hardware maintainer would be considered to teach English language in the language lab. And what is the need of an English graduate, English masters in an institution? That is what I said, that English teacher is an endangered species. Maybe for other subjects also it is, or maybe other subjects have met already the endangered situation. But English teacher is an endangered species. It is in this context. Very sensibly and invisibly, our responsibilities of teaching language is being taken away by these mechanisms, the global capitalism, the neo-colonialism. And these things have to be understood. Someone who insists that the language lab should be there, it is only to show the materialistic establishment of an institution for higher authority. But where is the intellectual establishment in an institution? These things have to be shown by English teachers, the teachers, not only English teachers, of course, all the teachers. Intellectual establishment is to be very specific and dominant in an institution rather than the materialistic establishment. Materialistic establishments are only projecting the materialistic fulfillment for the students. But that is not the idea of an institution, that it should provide the intellectual idea, intellectual capacities. So in that sense, language lab is not required. It is only an escapist methodology or an escapist idea to teach the classroom or teach the students directly.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So even I would also prefer with that. So we will not go with any language labs because it's very important to build an individual rather than building up anyone else, right? So,
Okay.
so the second question that I have is this question is answered for many of the other people also, like Professor Rajesh Ranganath and Mrs. Neha Kaushik also asked about the same question. I think this answer whatever you have given has answered them also. So the next question we have is, sir, from Bhaladin Fangli. He asked what are the parameters that are required or what you suggest to teach English in rural and border areas of the colleges?
Yeah. Of course, this is a very strange and a difficult situation for English teachers who are teaching at those points. That is what I insisted, the sociolinguistics should be our primary understanding in teaching in such areas. Because borders are strange, very specifically in India. It is a kind of culturally hybridized identity, or the culturally and linguistically hybridized students. And for them, it is not so easy just to introduce English language in a very direct way. They have to be, there has to be the knowledge of the socio-linguistic linguistics of that place, and also the understanding of the pedagogy of the oppressed to teach such students and to teach English at such places. And there is, of course, the English teachers have to make their own methodology of serving the students, the place, history, and the linguistic practices of that place, to understand what is the psychological level and the linguistic capacity of the students in acquiring English language. So each teacher has to be a researcher at such places to prepare oneself how to develop a methodology, a classroom teaching methodology for a particular place. So the teacher, the English teacher, that's what I said, that English teacher should not be historically identified and historically performed their teaching at classrooms. It should be practically developed, practically observed and understood to inform and acquire the knowledge to teach language. So you have to be very careful and primarily to be reading in a to a specific extent, to a certain extent, in context of pedagogies, in the context of ELT, sociolinguistics, linguistics, in order to prepare yourself to meet the requirement of the students. So that is what I believe the most important thing.
So next one we have the next one. So it is like there is a question that can the professors of universities give training to UG teachers regarding pedagogy of language English?
See, once again, indeed, it is a very funny question, I believe. I'm not, saying that it is not a question. It's a very funny question, because why you have to depend again, being the teachers, on the universities to acquire some certain amount of knowledge, certain requirements for the classroom performances. You can develop yourself. You can acquire the required knowledge by studying yourself. Lot many books are available, lot many ideas are available in connection with English language teaching, linguistics, everything. Why there is the necessity to depend again on the teachers? That is showing the passivity of English teachers. Why can't we prepare ourselves? And being a teacher, why you have to depend again on the teachers to learn something? You are independent to study and understand yourself, execute your classroom performance on the basis of your experiences and understandings. Why somebody has to say? When you have the capacity of reading, understanding English language, you study, you think, you critically analyze them for the need of the practical execution. And that is obviously preparing you. Why do you wait for somebody who is coming? Again, that means, you are waiting and you will be getting only those with the historical practices. Most of the teachers who have attended certain refresher courses, or those kind of university conditioned courses, must have come across the experiences that what is being taught and what subjects have been discussed at those classes, and what new understandings that you have made by spending 23 weeks or 2 weeks in a particular place. Most of the teachers have come across, I think. So when there is a chance, because nobody is deprived of information at this age, in this digital age, we are living in the galaxy of information. What is required? How much is required? Everything is available at the tip of your finger. when there is such kind of availability of the information, availability of the knowledge, only our interest of studying is required. Interest of understanding and contributing is required. Why there is a necessity of depending again on the university professors? There is no so-called professors at universities. I don't believe in that particular nomenclature or even that kind of creature as university professor. Until and unless one is committed for the society.
Thank
I
you, sir.
hope
Thank you, sir.
I communicated. Yeah.
Hello.
The next one sir, can you please suggest some of the feasible pedagogical strategies to teach English language and literature in a class consisting of heterogeneous groups?
Yeah. Yeah, this is, of course, a very serious problem with most of the teachers at the universities, at higher education. See, again, I have to refer to certain history at this point. The teaching literature at the universities and the language, as I mentioned at the beginning of my lecture, it is a historical practice. We teach literature and language without any theoretical and the practical knowledge, but by imitating our teachers if we have come across some good one, and then following. So coming out of that historical practice, when literature was considered as a serious thing or a serious subject, we have lots of methodologies of introducing literature and literary forms at the present time, because literature became a university subject in a serious manner during 1980s and 90s. And that's why glossary of literary terms. That was the new beginning of studying literature. Until that, the study of literature was only through the lectures delivered by the professors of universities. There was no fixed idea and the fixed understandings about certain terminologies until M.H. Abrams' glossary of literary terms evolved. When it provided certain understanding, certain ideas, certain fixed definitions for the literary usages, it provided a new methodology. So without following what has been done in the past and how we listened to literature and we acquired the idea of literature in the practical classes, we have to come out with the new method of studying literature, because there are a series of books on studying introduction to literature, teaching literature, and how to teach every genres in literature. With such methodologies, when we consider, obviously we can develop our own style of teaching literature. The only required condition is that we have to find and prepare ourselves to teach literature in an objective manner. Literature as literature. But without earlier in many of until 80s and 90s, of course, or even at present time also, at universities, literature is being taught from the subjective point of view. That is where the problem we are coming across. So when we face this kind of practical problem, we have to depend on the available resources. We try to change ourselves first so that we can change what we are practicing. So find the books which are available in relation with the introduction to literature, teaching literature and language, teaching language, and so many other conditions which obviously provide us the better knowledge of teaching literature.
Thank you, sir. So we have
Yeah.
too many questions. Sir, please don't mind. I'll go with one after the other. So the next
Yeah.
question is from Swapna KS. Please suggest some methods or techniques to teach English language through online mode to engineering students.
Of course, there is one big difference among the English teachers, because teaching English depends on the kind of students we get also and the kind of classroom we face also. Teaching engineering students is a very big challenge to the teachers of those colleges, because their interest for teaching for listening English language seems to be very less, and I understand what practical difficulty that the teacher would be facing to teach the engineering students. It is actually the problem with the curriculum which is making the difficulty of teaching English language, but not with the methodology. Because
break.
a very small amount
So we
is
have
being
question added with so that like he's a teacher from he's an English teacher from engineering college. So he has he says that the curriculum I teach has a little to do with developing language skills of the students. So he has asked like how to deal with it pediment ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ. So same thing like relative. So you can answer both I think together.
Yeah. I maybe I will be answering that particular question also. The difficulty of teaching engineering students is primarily not with the curriculum or the syllabus prescribed, but with the students themselves, because their concern for studying acquiring language is very less, and their idea about language is also completely different, because they just study a subject without knowing that they are actually going through a language. And it is not known to most of the science students, or of course to the whole academic section itself, that man is enfolded in language. A very primary idea about language and man is that man is enfolded in language. So most of the science students, not most of the students, science students generally won't come across this idea of language. So the curriculum is to be prepared in such a way to create interest and to adopt a methodology to teach it to the engineering students, rather than inventing a new methodology. Because classroom maintenance for such kind of students is really a knowledge of common sense rather than any theoretical sense. I can understand what kind of problems and how difficult for the students, and specifically for the lady teachers, to manage the boys of a certain age in the engineering college. So there is a certain measures to be considered, and the psychology of the students have to be understood in prescribing syllabus for them. That is once again the problem of the so-called university teachers or the university boards in framing the syllabus for such teachers, such students, or for such classes. It was simply considered some primary requirement of language is enough for the students of engineering, so that because they already have acquired already certain level of language, and there is no necessity for them. No, English literature is to be taught. As far as I personally concerned, English literature is to be taught to those students rather than the language, because they are to be introduced with the idea of humanities. They are to be given with the commitment they have for the society rather than for themselves. And that's why now I found very difficult a different kind. That's why we generally find a very different and an odd kind of behavior among the engineering students when it comes to the social life. Very completely different. So what is required is a complete reframing of the syllabus to prepare those students also to be the part of the system rather than simply giving them some primary idea of language. So when it is very meager to teach for the engineering classes, we face a severe problem in managing the class. And this is what I heard, with other engineering college teachers also. It is not actually their problem. The curriculum designed for them is creating the problem in managing the classroom. So there is no specific methodology to be considered for engineering students. They are also students. Obviously, they must be students. They are students and they are to be considered as students. And for them, the content is most important rather than the methodology. And this is the problem they are facing. And the content is to be prepared according to the students and the maintenance of the classroom. And it depends on their behavior also. So I understand what problems the teachers of the engineering college are facing in teaching language. Hope I convince them.
Okay, sir. So we have like some combined two questions that we have. I'll just ask both together. So, sir, can you tell me how can English language curriculum be framed so as to improve the language skills of students? And there is also a question that is comes from something related to that. They're asking, like, do you think that the future of English language is at stake?
Yeah, indeed, I informed or referred, in my earlier, discussion itself. Linguistics, consideration of linguistics, sociolinguistics, pedagogy of the oppressed, and preparing the syllabus or framing the syllabus according to the requirement of the categories of student would make a successful teaching of English language. Which that's why I mentioned, the practical condition of saying that, a poem is prescribed and some, grammar part is followed with that particular poem. And it is a very big challenge for any teacher to move from the poem, from literature to the grammar part. And there is no practical and the logical connection between these two. And the kind of interest that you have maintained in making students to listen your class would be immediately cut off when you switch over to the grammar part of the class, grammar part of the lesson or the chapter. So this practical thing is to be understood, analyzed, and the teachers have to demand that this is the subject, this is the methodology, this is the syllabus or the curriculum required for our kind of students. Indeed, there is a big change required at the degree level, specifically at the degree level, to teach language. But what we are following is the historical fault method of history. Simply considering that, by speaking on literature, speaking about literary forms and about, poets and the dramatists, that the students would be acquiring English language. No, it's obviously a wrong method that we are still following. Very interesting thing I want to share at this point is when I was, working as lecturer in Maharaja's College in Mysore, I was going through the evaluation work also, and just for the curiosity and with the funny thing, as a funny thing, I started now considering the way the word Shakespeare, the spelling of the word Shakespeare is being written by the students. I just started noting how different the students write the spelling of the word Shakespeare. I came across almost 93 types of spellings written by the students for the single word Shakespeare. With this particular thing, you can understand how many kinds of students we have. For a single word, if students are writing 93 varieties of spelling, what kind of students we have? And obviously, I came across after many, years, that what are we teaching rather than what kind of students, what are we teaching? Are we teaching the required things for the students? So with this particular practical conditions of the students, it is the responsibility of the English teachers to review at this point, to examine what is required to provide the students as English language at the higher education, which is the most important point to be reconsidered, reviewed, and accordingly performed. Otherwise, as one participant asked the question about the language lab. Some establishments, some authorities at the government level would simply substitute the computers for English teachers. And it is in this context I am always repeating and repeated many times also with other is an endangered species. We have to prepare, we have to rise to the occasion to represent ourselves, to show our mettle that we English teachers are obvious, inevitable. And for all these things, what I request humbly is that English teachers have to study. It is not just what the curriculum given is our responsibility of reading and preparing. No, we have to prepare beyond the classroom. We have to prepare beyond the curriculum. Then only makes us to be a successful English teachers. You act according to the point. You act according to the requirement. Then it makes the fulfillment of the performance. If you are just depending that the curriculum is given, a textbook is given, I want to execute only this amount, there would be an utter failure. There would be a serious problem in managing the classroom. And that wouldn't make a teacher a successful English teacher. So be continuous in studying, acquiring, critically analyzing our classroom, critically analyzing, understanding the curriculum, the syllabus, and to prepare ourselves to provide the best of ourselves, the best of our knowledge about language and literature. There is no fixed thing. See, this is the kind of uh, understanding and idea with many of the participants and many of the teachers at this point. That's a kind of relationship between the patient and a doctor. Like doctor patient revealing this is the problem I have, and the doctor prescribing a medicine, take this one and it is real. No, this is not a disease that we are facing with. This is a problem where we have to practically analyze ourselves to resolve it. I can't provide any direct medicine. I don't have any such prescription, but I can only provide the exercises to be done. Hope I am not too uncourteous in saying these things. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sir.
Okay.
So next question we have is like, sir, which tool or technique is best for teaching English language in this 21st century?
Okay, there is no. See, again, one problem with our teacher is that our responsibility of teaching language is only in connection with the prescribed syllabus. Please come out of this mental status, this status. It is not just through the frame, through the syllabus or through the curriculum provided that we can provide English language. We should show more commitment and more responsibility, as I said, teaching beyond the text prescribed. Because at this point, English language teaching English language and the need of English language is being turned into another form called ESP, English for specific purpose. That era is over, teaching English language, teaching English for specific purpose. And this is not being introduced, not being given information, and not being made understood by our acquired knowledge of the subject, in our acquired knowledge of the subject at universities. That is why I said, English teacher is a paradoxical status. The demand is different and the preparation is different. English is a paradoxical status. And what you're all asking the question, the series of questions I am coming across is to understand once again in what status we are in what status we are, in what condition we are working. In a paradoxical condition we are working, that we have to resolve this paradoxical status. What is required is the self-dedication, the self-improvement, and the self-commitment to understand what are all the available things to prepare for my practical classroom. That is most important. There is no, as I said, the fixed model or the fixed thing. You act according to the need of the hour. And for that act of the hour, one should have come across the wide reading, examining the possibilities of acquiring the better knowledge of teaching language as well as teachings about language. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. This is one important question, I think, like for this generation. There is a question that, does social media improve language skills, and how social media would affect English?
Okay. See, when the very word skill appears, means the skill is used for a greater responsibility, a greater commitment. For everyday conversation, you are not required of a skill. For a specific purpose, one should have a skill to use and accordingly get the reward or provide the result. So when the idea of skill evolves, means there should be a strong commitment and a purpose. Indeed, for this kind of commitment and the purpose, if one is getting influenced by the language used in social media, it is the deficiency of the person in following the academic principles. For a common man, for a layman, of course, this question is not connected or not obvious. But for an academician, for a teacher, one should stand above the influences of the social media with a stronger commitment to use the language as language. That is what I mentioned at a particular point, grammaticality, following the rules in framing a sentence of a language, following the grammatical rules in framing the sentence of a language. Of course, you can communicate. Maximum communication of human beings is being done with non-verbal communication. But when it comes to the verbal communication is used to express the authenticity of the idea, authenticity of the meaning. And obviously, there should be the grammaticality of that expression. So, social medias and the use of language at the different form is not for a specific and a dignified purpose. But when it is there, when there is a need of using the language for a specific purpose, that is for a specific cause and the function, Obviously, there should be the grammar. There, the authenticity of the language is required. For example, if a government has to provide an order, then it should be with the complete grammaticality. If there is any mistake, either knowingly, unknowingly, the language could be interpreted in any way. So one should be very careful. There should not be a question like maintaining the grammaticality. As a teacher, as teachers of English or teachers of language in general, we must follow the grammaticality. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Sir, first I'll go with one question that is asked by Dr. Bharat Kumar. Can you give some tips for writing research papers or articles? So there are some questions regarding that. Like they have asked for how do we write articles for UGC approved journals? 2 or 3 names of journals that you could suggest. So things are asked like this. It's a combined question.
Indeed, it's a very big thing to discuss. But one thing I just want to mention is that we are just being comfortable in reading, listening, and enjoying literature. But when it comes to the research level, the whole university system has failed to provide us the idea of research writing, not just research writing, about writing itself. With all the teachers who are all participating, English teachers who are all participating, just introspect yourself or remember yourself where or in which class writing an answer for a literary question is being explained. Who has provided? Was there any such thing in the part of the curriculum at either at the BA or MA level? There is no idea of writing at all. These are all because the problem of the curriculum at that point where teaching was primarily considered rather than writing. It was not taught at that time during 80s and 90s in Indian universities. It was not thought that one day there would be a need of using language for a specific purpose. So it was just considered to teach literature in their own passion, in their own passion, and that has completely destroyed and disturbed our abilities of using language for the specific purpose. Now you are coming across with the specific purpose, that is for research writing. Of course, series of books are available. You can write, you can find research writing, academic writing. It is categorized under academic writing and research writing. Many books are available. You find and you can read and develop that technique of writing the research paper. It's available, but as it was not taught, I can understand what problem that the teachers are facing now for the publication of the research articles. Many books are available. Indeed, if it is required, I can share my email and then I share a copy of soft copy with you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, meanwhile, there is a small question that students are thinking that English is very difficult. So, can you give some suggestions to those students who think that English is difficult?
Again, it comes to the practical conditions of the classroom. It is not English difficult. It is the English teacher who is not reaching the students. I think Professor Onegoda is agreeing with me. It is the English teacher who is not reaching the students.
Yes, sir, I agree, you said. Yes.
So, English is not the
Obviously.
problem. English is not the problem. English teachers are the problem.
Yeah.
And why English teachers are the problems? English teachers are following the historical practice. That is why I said reviewing of English at higher education is required. What is to be reviewed? Our historical identity is to be reviewed. How I am a teacher, how I am an English teacher is to be reframed, to adapt, to accommodate myself to the classroom. English need not to be taught in English only, which would be a stupidous level. They don't know the language at all. ಅದು ಹೇಗಿದೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಈಜ್ ಬರದೇ ಇದ್ದವನಿಗೆ ನೀರಿಗೆ ಇಳಿಸ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಈಜ್ ಕಲಿ ಅನ್ನೋ ಹಾಗೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಇದೆ. ಆದ್ರೆ ಅನಿವಾರ್ಯ ನೀರೊಳಗೆ ಇಳ್ದೇನೆ ಈಜ್ ಕಲಿಬೇಕು, ನೀರ್ ಇಲ್ದೇನೆ ಈಜ್ ಕಲಿಯೋದಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಇದು ಪ್ರಾಯೋಗಿಕವಾದ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ, ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟಿಕಲ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್. ಸೊ what is that? That's what I said. First you have to set the atmosphere of the classroom that this is not an English classroom, and first set the atmosphere and the relationship with the students that you are not a doctor who has come to give the English medicine. Come out of those identities, those historical identities. Those things are all lost. ಆಶೀರ್ವಾದ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣನೇ ನಮಗೆ ಜ್ಞಾನ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅನ್ನೋ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಲಿ ಯಾರು ಇಲ್ಲ. We have to work, we have to prepare for the hour. That's what I said. You prepare, you analyze the students, you made a small research of your own on the classroom by knowing what is the background of the students, what is the background of their society, economic background, social background, cultural background. See, I mentioned one particular incident that I collected. I got some 93 kinds of spellings of the word Shakespeare. You see, by going through that, I could categorize, as it was only belonging to the Mysore University boundary. I could categorize who is from Chamarajanagar and who is from T. Narsipur and who is from KR Nagar part, by just going through the spellings of the word Shakespeare. That is a socio-linguistic problem. With the kind of pronouncing the word Shah, we could categorize who pronounces Shah word letter or the sound Shah in Chamarajanagar, in Kozhikode, in Narsipura, or in Mandya and Mysore. These are all the curious thing, the critical thinking that the English teachers have to inculcate in executing the classroom work. So it is all with the teachers only. We are not working off the classroom, and seems that is the biggest problem. We are working in the classroom, we are serious, we are committed in the classroom, and for the classroom, how much we are committed is the question. So go through it. Everything is available. Most of the things are very comfortably, conveniently available, and most of the books are very easy to assess, very easy to go through, and very helpful to come out of the practical problems that we as English teachers facing at this point. Read them, analyze them, and review yourself first how to prepare for the next class. Probably that would resolve the problem rather than any direct medicine.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So there is one question that is like, can you please give some tips to students who will struggle to present their answer in their own words in English, even if they know the answer? Means it's a difficulty for the students to frame statements and write things onto the answer sheet. That's the problem, I think. So that's the question, sir.
Okay. See, I insist that particular thing, grammaticality, is to be considered to teach grammar. We teach the parts of speech, but we leave them without combining the parts of speech at the end of each semester. I hope I am right. We teach all the parts of speech, and you leave them without combining all the parts of speech together. So what is happening? We are teaching the parts, but we are not giving them the idea of the whole. And that is where student, even though having the idea of the answer is using only the parts of speech but not producing the sentence. So what is to be considered? That practical condition of understanding what is the socio-linguistic background of the student, knowing that how to introduce grammar either through the sentence or through the words is to be assessed, analyzed, critically examined, and then adopt a method of your own at every classroom. At the level of every classroom, in each classroom, adopt a methodology of your own. And that is what I insist. Do not follow a historical method of teaching English, believing, accepting my teacher, my favorite teacher was teaching like this, so I teach the same way. It was his capacity and your capacity which was meeting together at a point to have some understanding. But you cannot expect the same with the other student, the students of the new age. So develop your research, do some research of the place, of the class, of the age, and even gender also at the point to prepare what is to be given for them. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. That was actually useful, and the point of relating that the way of teaching, like the favorite teacher is teaching, and I do the same thing. That happens with all of us many times. And moving on, sir, we have a question like, can you throw some light on the importance of phonetics in English language teaching to new learners of English?
See, one particular thing that we are in the context of India is that English is not a new language. It has been part of the history. It is in part of the culture also. Indeed, to understand English is such a weird language. There is no connection between its alphabets and the words, primarily. And indeed, this is the biggest problem that acquiring English language everyone is facing. The biggest problem is the words, the letter is different, and combined together, the word emerging is different. In that way, English is an immature language in the context of Sanskrit language. Because why it is an immature is, as Professor Badiger mentioned at the beginning itself, with the kind of Latin and all those things, they wanted to establish their population, their politics in the context of English-speaking population. So they they borrowed whatever is available in different languages and set together, the heap of broken images, as I said, and that was imposed. Just read all this. The spelling and the word is not coordinating to each other. It is at that point the need of phonetics evolve. The need of phonetics evolves. Of course, to teach at the primary level, to insist the pronunciation of words in English language, the idea of phonetics is obvious. But what is most important is our purpose of teaching English language is not to prepare an individual to become an English. We should have in the mind, our purpose is not to make a student to become an English. And by providing English language, we are not preparing an individual to become an English as well as into English. That is what we are facing the problem. And that is where we are required of phonetics. Because English is such a language where phonetics is to be incorporated to give the proper pronunciation of words. Because most of the usage of English language is in the verbal form. So change in the pronunciation would change in the understanding of the meaning. And that's why phonetics is important, and it has to be given as English is been acquired by as a second language, because always there is an influence of first language on second language. So phonetics is important, but do not depend too much on it to make think as a perfectionist in teaching English language. This would be a serious obstacle also in teaching English language. You see, there is one common behavior among all the English teachers, that uh, the pronunciation, the mistakes done by another English teacher uh, uh, makes our identity as English teacher upheld, or improved one. This is how our knowledge of English is always been assessed. With the mistakes others are doing in English language, either pronunciation or in grammar, we assess our position. Indeed, it is incorporated in our historical practice also as an English teacher, or English identity as an English teacher. We always assess our ability of language, our knowledge of language, by identifying the mistakes and the faults in other English teacher. So these are all the inhibitions that we have developed because of the historical practice. Somebody pronounces, somebody expresses in an English way, idiomatic expressions are there, and we won't be using or coming out. So that makes the serious problem among the English teachers to perform completely in the classroom. So come out of all these inhibitions, historically constructed identity of English. You speak English grammatically, that is the English. Pronunciation is second, as far as I believe. Pronunciation is second, because I'm not born to speak English, but I am made to learn English. That's all. Okay. I think I answered some.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The last question we have is that, knowing the demands of language in the era of post-global world, why universities in India have still not considered in changing the syllabus at UG and PG level?
That is what I mentioned at the beginning. Historical practices are still prevailing at the universities. There is a need of reviewing. There is a need of reviewing English at higher education. Review. That is the problem we are facing. That is the problem why English teacher is a paradoxical identity, is a paradoxical status. Why? Means it has not been demanded. English teachers who are of that requirement and understanding have to demand, I need this kind of syllabus, this kind of curriculum to teach language for my classroom, for my kind of students. You raise the voice, you oppose, write the criticism, write the review of the syllabus, write the review on the curriculum prepared by the universities. Write them with the proper explanation, with the proper justification, how it is wrong, why it is wrong, what right is required at this point. Give them the reply. Don't be the passive in accepting whatever is given. It's all because studying literature itself gives certain amount of passive attitude generally. It gives a passive attitude. I just read something, I become very intelligent. This is how. No, unless you write something, you cannot correct. Write, reply to the universities, give a statement, give explanation, or produce something, your understanding, to show them this is what is required. Why it is required is nobody is demanding the change. Now, why it is produced or why it is given is or followed means nobody is demanding the change. Nobody is demanding the change, and nobody is raising also that there is something beyond these things prescribed by the university, so-called university professors to teach language. It's all because we are not studying. We are not acquiring the required amount of knowledge for the performances at the classroom. Don't depend on the others to learn something. Let's make ourselves the approach and the efforts to learn something, to understand something. That makes the better status, better condition for changing whatever is being under the practice. That's what I insisted to consider reviewing English at higher education.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So these are the questions that we had. I think we have answered all the questions that are asked by our participants. And before I just get into the next level, I just want to give you all the acknowledgements that we have received during the complete session, sir. Participants have been very happy listening to you, and they have given a lot of comments stating that the relationship that you have tried to build in with respect to the language and the need of a teacher who has to build his path, and all the communication that with respect to the need for the students, and whatever that you explained very recently about the need for building up syllabus for the university level, all those things. Everything was very nicely appreciated by all the participants. So I thank you behalf of all the participants for giving a wonderful information and a lot of summarized content for all of us. That was very interesting and informative, sir. So you have got a lot of comments. All the credits to you, sir. So now I request Manegada sir have something to say.
Principal. Ullas.
Over to Principal. Ullas.
Yeah, okay.
Good
Finally, we
afternoon
are
to all, actually. Good afternoon to all.
I request the principal of JSS College, Gundlupet, Dr. Mahadev Swami, sir, to present the vote of thanks. So please, sir.
Sir. Good afternoon to all. In the present scenario, English is widely spoken language. It is referred to a global language, the multilingua franca of the modern era. It is the language most often taught as a second language around the world. In India, English is used in the process of communication with the outside world. India does have great ethnic and linguistic diversity, and we can therefore find English acting as an indispensable link language. English is said to be the world's most important language, which has the communicative and educative value. English is used all over the world, not out of any compulsion, but because of the realization that it has certain advantages. In this relation, we have organized this webinar in connection to the reviewing of English at higher education level. In fact, actually, it's a wonderful session we had since from the morning, actually. It's my privilege to propose the vote of thanks. At the outset, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to the respected our Executive Secretary, Dr. C.J. Betsurmat, Professor Morbada Mallikarjun, the Director, Collegiate Education Division, JSS Mahavidyapita, and Shri B. Niranjan Murthy, Assistant Director, College Education Division at JSS Mahavidyapita, for their encouragement to have this kind of webinar, and actually meaningful webinar. And really it helped the participants to know about the affluences of the concept of language. And in connection to this, actually, I must thank two great personalities were being with us. In fact, from the point of actually Professor Badiger, sir, you introduced us to the evolution of English language and literature in England. And from the 16th century onwards, what kind of development has taken place in the literary movement in the particular Shakespearean and Chaucer eras in England. Really, it is enlightened and it is a delightful. Thank you very much, sir, Professor Badiger, sir. Thank you very much, sir. And I must thank Dr. Sri Kirti. Happening actually, the Sri Kirti, sir, actually, we were together in the 90s in the Gnanabuddhi and Maharajas College campus, sir. I think you might have forgotten that we were together actually. In fact, you really developed and you have become one of the good academicians. I must say that I must appreciate your valuable that idea which you spoken, and actually you introduced our participants regarding English language and curriculum in India. and historical forces responsible for the introduction of English language and education in India, particularly from the point of the Macaulay concept and the uh, colonial influence, how actually that it made the colonial masters to introduce the English language in India. And even one more point actually really attracted me and really it touched my heart actually with regarding to the print capitalism. Really wonderful thought, really wonderful thought, and really made us to think in this line actually how the print capitalism still it is influencing on us and it is making us. Another point actually which attracted me, whatever the uh, software or hardware, it cannot replace the brain of a teacher or human beings. And actually, teacher is going to influence the students and particularly in learning the language. Actually, really, I must thank on behalf of my organization JSS Mahavidyapita and college on behalf of the participants. And really, you spoke very well, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
And uh, the webinar would have not successful without the support of Professor Ullas. He is kind enough actually in supporting this kind of activities in our college. Actually, we are conducting. Actually, this is the second webinar we have conducted successfully. The lot more comments actually. The positively our participants responded, and actually positively they approached the resource person in getting the proper answers. In fact, thank you, Ullas. Thanks on behalf of my college and my staff members. Actually, once again, I would like to extend my gratitude to you. I must
Thank
extend
you.
my gratitude to Dr. C.S. Vannegoda for organizing this webinar. He has taken a lot of pain and even actually pressure from my side, and actually he organized a meaningful webinar in our college, and actually the participants actually enjoyed. I think. Thank you very much, Professor Vannegoda, sir. I would like to extend my gratitude to my younger friend MJ Prakash, who is assisting technically in the college in organizing this kind of activities in the college. And I must thank my IKSC coordinator and my office superintendent and my colleagues. And I must thank, last but not least, the participants who are actually took actively part in this webinar and they enjoyed it. Thank you, one and all. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for a very brief. Thank you. I think we are about to complete the session for now, and we have got too many information. And frankly speaking, if you ask me with respect to the responses that we have got from the participants, we have got more than what we expected from this webinar. So even from the team Diksuchi, I thank everyone who has given us an opportunity. I thank our Swamiji and then JSS Mahavidyapita and also the college for giving us an opportunity to host this program from our end. And I thank Dr. Sri Kirti sir for a very valuable speech and very informative session, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, one and all. Thank you.